Okay, here's a new one based on a video that just came out by CFAP's channel. A lot of y'all may be familiar with Chuck's channel. If you're not, you should go check it out. Especially if you're interested in lost pyramids or places that are all across Egypt that look like pyramids now that you look down on them, like you're looking down on this picture here, or especially for ancient American places and sites. He's done quite a few. I don't know exactly what the number is. I'm not sure if he knows exactly either. And of course, some of these that he's done have more than one in it and so on. But this is one he did on Cahokia site, and it's a different place. It's different, just like the Hopi and the Arapaho are different, just like the Apache were different, and many civilizations that we knew of whenever we finally came to the Americas and still kind of exist today. There are ones that no longer exist, lost civilization type people. And now we're finding there are a lot of artifacts that are going back 30,000 years. 130,000 years. The Calico Dig site shows some type of hominids or humanoids were fragmenting, churning flint at some 200,000 years ago. That's not really the focus on this, though, but whenever I was a kid, I had an ancient thought that Cro-Magnon man had somehow came from North America and went to the old world. And that the reason that we saw so many of his remnants so far east was that he was a seafaring people, and instead of it going across and then wondering if we ever had made it across, well over 30,000 years ago, he had made it across, and then that was the idea of Atlanteans, and the thing had gotten changed over time and just screwed up. It's one I should do a separate video on. That, from what I found out when I was a kid, and of course everybody thinking everything was, Cro-Mag-Ugh back then, led us to not think that that's the way that it went. And so that had to be put on the shelf for quite some time, in fact over 30 years. And in a modern day, it pokes its head back up as a possibility. That's not what this video is about at all either, but I'm just rambling on things that came to mind as I started to go through this, and then started to do a video about it, waited for it to charge a little bit, and thought of one too many thoughts before I began. Got about 5 things that I make sure I want to say in this, and I haven't started yet. Let's start with one, that mounds are it. Now, like, I'm a child of the 60s, and hey, that's it, right? Well, mounds are the it. It's becoming the new place. You see, it's real hard to find anything that's archaeological whatsoever attached to humanoids. We found remnants in a cave, but now we realize that caves were something that were rarely used as opposed to humanity. And therefore, otherwise caves would be littered, much more worse. It wouldn't be the rare find that it is. But therefore, where were their habitations going on? And in the Wayback Machine, I told you, like elves and stuff, people lived in a way that was more in a harmony to where they didn't have anything that was left behind that was unnatural looking. Things faded away or whatever and used out of wood and stuff like that. You might find post holes and stuff like that that added to natural trees that are already growing there and such. But if you look here, we're seeing mounds that are here, finger of God, here, across here, up here's a trapezoid pyramid with the top chopped off. Here's another one down here. Why is this one bigger but flatter and this one more oblong and not? Well, strangely, it has to do with stars. So still at mounds, and topic one or concept is that we're finding today with like Göbekli Tepe and a lot of these places that are tells or mounds, that's where it was at. That's where it was at leading into and after the last ice age and the younger dryas and all the things that we talked about. And we can find that aspect of kurgans and mounds like that all over the Indo-Pacific or Indo-European lands. In Europe itself and all the way over in Western Europe, especially, we find a special connection with mounds and everything that are from the first people that came there. And in my videos, we make connections to where they came from. But this shows that these people that had these mounds going on had connections to the Indians, or were in part the people that used to be connected to ancient Proto-Indo-Europeans who had come into the Americas. I'm lucky enough to live in Texas down near the Galt site. Well, it's not really down near me. Texas is huge. It's a few hundred miles south of me. But in the Galt site, somebody made a mistake and they dug in a little mound or tell area that they had found a lot of arrowheads in, and they told them they could dig a few feet and probably find something if they were going to find it in the spot they were doing. And those people made the mistake of going where the people had already done before and even double done it in that area before. And from what I understand, dug down a little bit more and weren't finding anything, and all of a sudden popped up real incredible Solutrean arrowheads. And so that was way pre-Clovis. You were supposed to have stopped. Makes you wonder, in all these tell spots where it looked like people had been before, maybe whenever the ancient Amerindians that we see that have come to these places and realized they were a great place, not only was it a great place because it looked great, but it had already been set up once before, and they kind of realized it and utilized it. Clearly, in a video I did about a year and a half ago, it shows the migrations of Indians that we know of and how it only goes back a few hundred years from our common knowledge now and back, but they shifted around quite a bit. These people didn't used to be here, those didn't used to be there, and then what the map basically looked like whenever we showed up and what our projections were, and then how that changed into our modern time. But mounds, very important. Almond joys got nuts, mounds don't, you see. And these people in these mounds have a lot of artifacts that go with them. So a secondary idea here, before I even get off the first picture, or let it move a little bit so we can go to the Cahokia site and just see a little bit of it here. This is the largest pyramid in North America. It's right here. It's Monk's Mound. A lot of people are probably familiar with it. And it's a mound, but it's not really just a mound. If you think about it, another thought came to mind whenever I was waiting for it to charge, is the death cults. And I did a video about that before too, and brushed upon ideas like this. But the idea of death cults is the only reason that we seem to have these civilizations and their remnants of them. Things that with a cult are an idea of death and the afterlife. You see, well, that if you believe in a modern idea, that's going to be forever, and your life is just about 72 years or whatever, and reaching farther in a modern day, of course. But in that idea, There's that afterlife that you have to set up for, and these people set up for it. And then because there were great mounds that were done and then built upon, and then other places around it, it became a structure of a place that may have been just for ceremony, but then, just like we have churches and graveyards and things like that today set aside in places in the outskirts of town and so on too, which eventually gets swallowed all up, and it's in the center of town, isn't it, almost, still, no matter what. But there's still that death cult idea. Churches, really, if you look at it, it goes through that whole idea, but if you've ever been to a funeral, you realize what the whole thing's all about. Or it sure puts that puzzle that you never had in it if a close family member dies, or somebody that you're close to. But these death cults, who were just venerating great people, and in most cases, like the Bible says, great men of old, men of well renown. These death cults were venerating them, and then in key made a place of commonality to people, and due to such, they created great mounds, and they wanted to let you know that there was somebody great enough that they went through the trouble of doing this, and all the people knew about it to the point that they all came together to make sure this happened. And again, this is not hunter-gatherer ideals. In fact, Cahokia is looked at as being the first American site where they seem to have set and got things all down and together. Like you see in South American sites that we put this stuff together, which there are conspicuities with that we won't even get into. But in this idea here, it's this death cult that brought forth this place. A lot of people look at the concept of Göbekli Tepe as being a death cult brought about this thing, this concept. We've shown it along with other mounds and other tells, and then that tell turns into a city like Cahokia and so on recently, with all kinds of connections and grid work. And I didn't show it just a second ago, but you could see a grid work in it. In fact, it beckons me to go back to it to show you this whenever I just first started out on it. And where that looks like, we're at in here, Cahokia, Mississippi Mound Builder concept, right? And I just missed it right there too. But effectively, there's grids, and there's a grid and a line with little round dots on either side of it, crosshatch, tic-tac, back and forth, and different places like that added up, and show you that there were a lot more places than you even would think about attached to this civilization. Whenever you get up to this point, you start to be able to look in blotches in the ground, finger of God again, in places, and sometimes you find a circle or dots or things like that let you show there must have been something else here. Like right now, there looks like there was something else right in here. Just off the screen to the left looks conspicuous too, but there are mounds all over this, and what beckoned Chuck to do the video about it was that he saw something and it clicked. Now, I often thought that he watched a few of my videos, but it's someone who has the same knowledge that the idea that the smiting pose of the Egyptians is actually a pose of Orion, and that he's in that smiting pose, and it all goes with it. And if we look at the very first Narmer palette, he even has it in there. But in that one, we have what's believed to be a fox pelt hanging down that they have, and their kilt and so on too. There are many depictions that go with this Orion, and if I don't let this go, then I'll never get into it, really. But so here's Cahokia whenever you look onto it, and it is as big as what was shown just there. But there's this big highway, double set, running through here, and I think that's going to really be a key to being able to add to his video here and explain while something's missing. Because something seems to be missing, and we can probably easily see what it is whenever we make the full connection of what he's made. And I agree with it. We'll call it 96% because of a couple of factors, but it's it. It's all in the mounds. And so this is the layout that they've given in the depiction of all of Cahokia set north to south in the way that it looks. And what's amazing is Monk's Mound is really shown right here, Finger of God. But you can probably see that most every building that we've been able to identify through everywhere is created north to south, east to west, squared off. Even ones with the slit lines in them, and I don't know if that one shows up at the bottom, but that one is kind of important because it has a few around a little slit line. That becomes somewhat important because if you put all this together, this is the depiction of Orion looking down from like a half mile up in the air, and what it would look like. Here's his head. This is the major full body that's here. One leg coming down, the other coming down this way. The famous arm coming out in a straight line and having the bow or bent edge onto it. And this is a little different than the actual stars that we have. You'll notice that we have two close together right here at the very bottom of that. But that changes here in just a minute. Whenever we look at the real stars, I'll give you my idea on that when we get to it, rather than cram it all in now and then have you see it then. But even the concept of the aegis, that's pretty important in the Orion concept and all of the folklore that goes along with that, and the idea of rebirth. And of course that go in with the people of the Golden Fleece, which have connections to the Proto-Indo-Europeans, that have connections, I'm saying, to the ancient Indians, whether you want to go with the idea that they taught them the swastika and all these things, and they kept it for thousands of years, not showing it very much, if any at all, and then all of a sudden, kapoink, popped up and did this. Or maybe some other people, along with the people that we know of as the Amerindians, made this trek before, and not always had to go across the Bering Strait. Got another video coming up on that, and I'm waiting just for one more paper to come out that's finishing this concept that's in the making right now. Also, we can see the other arm that goes back here, and what he's pointing at right now is a wood hinge that they had, and this would have corresponded with Betelgeuse and the stance of Orion that they have here. And hopefully you can still see that. When I was a kid, we used to play Connect the Dots. It was a fun little game, but after you'd done it a few times, bam, you could just see it. And especially ones that even look kind of funny, if you looked at the numbers and how they went, that really showed you how to draw the line around it, and you got it, huh? But pictures of constellations and everything, well, part of that dream thing that I had whenever I was a kid, that Cro-Magnon man had came from North America, was what we were going to find was that all these star constellations were drawn out across the land, in the old world and there, and it was going to make correspondences. And there have been a few, and it's enough to make a whole separate video about, and I have done videos on separate ones, even here recently, where we talked about in Cairo and its connections to Mars and Aries and different other cities along Egypt, apparently corresponding to the idea of where the planets are and things along that line. But I've got videos that are 4 years old now showing you that they had the same correlation in ancient Western Europe and Ireland, and that there were ancient mounds or tells that churches were built on, and these churches were churches or serpent churches before St. Patrick or anything happened, and those churches had been there before. One of them professed to be the Church of St. Thomas, brother of Jesus Christ, and people had found the other ones that connect to that, but whenever they did, plotting it out on a map, it showed a pentagram laid out which had a circumference of 666 miles. Oh, and that's the devil's he and the serpent stuff. No, it was the knowledge that went with, now I guess the fourth topic is Astro Theology, and that becomes much more important in understanding the fact that they knew about it. And they plotted out places on the planet that corresponded in certain ways with the way that the planets worked out, so they had it all hooked up, heaven and earth, and it made the seasons grow and everything, and they were in harmony with it. People don't understand it today, and some of the cities that we live in today are on top of those mounds. And I've made quite a few comments before that during your lifetime you've probably walked across ancient artifacts, something that would be pretty important to humanity to know. You may have lived on top of it with one of your houses, but better yet, there might be one inside a shopping mall that you've been in before. But think of the millions of people that have walked across on top of that, that's up under the concrete of that shopping mall, or if something's in the middle of a road but deep enough to where they didn't find it and they paved the road over the top of it. And we may never know what we never knew, but how many times have you drove down that highway if you live there? So the artifacts have been right below you. It's right below our feet, and people have always looked to, what's beyond that next mound? What's beyond that next mound? Well, the neat thing is it's that mound. When you finally got up onto that mound and you looked around and you saw the ones, and you go, well, I'll look around here, but I'm going to walk to that other mound so I can get on top of it and get a good look around. What? Maybe it has more to do with the mounds than you know it does. Maybe they're all lined up sacredly to geometry, and distances mean things, and certain temples and certain spots and certain buildings and certain spots all meant things to these people. You can see where he's got his face, but then there's a definitive building, one of the prominent ones out of it all, that have to do with what would be his coming out of his mouth. There's some little swamplands around in here that are lighter phase areas, and they say some of that is where they've taken that and the mud, the dirt that was there, and helped to build the mounds, but then also used it as excessive floodplains for other places, and then they're using that for fertility and things around it. And so there's a wood hinge that's there, but one thing that, it just stands out, this looks like they dotted Orion and did it to a point. And whenever you look at the normal depiction of it, we only use, Betelgeuse and a few of the Rigel and all these ones and make it up. It's a little different. And he's showing you right here where that bow is, and I'll show you how that's a little different now. There's a discrepancy that's there, and I'm not discrepancing Chuck, I'm discrepancing reality with what they did on the ground here. For here's a common depiction of Orion as one of our constellations in that dot-to-dot idea. But you notice here that he's got that belt, and that's the thing that's missing. But I think the reason it's missing is because they built a highway through it. But I think they built a highway through it because they used to already have a road through there. I think they built a road through there so they could pass through But in doing so and flattening the land around that to make some farmland and so on, which we lost the belt of Orion somehow, or maybe it's there hidden in the trees. But LiDAR shows up and it shows that we're missing something. But then there's another sacred knowledge. You see, because we know this is somebody who's got a shield in one hand and a sword up here. And he's got the Aegis draped across, or wait, it's Hercules, and that's a club. Am I right? Orion the hunter, right? Oh no, wait. That's a bow and arrow. That's a bow and arrow, and he's the hunter in that way, right? Yep. Notice how the belt points up through to Aldebaran. Aldebaran's in Star Wars. But see how it has that ring, and then instead of having two close together, it has that extra one down there. And it's not because stars have changed over time, which we'll show you in just a second. It's actually because they wanted to go ahead and make it the full bow that it was in their depiction, because there's a lot of other depictions. There's ones where this is made into ball, and he's got a spear back here ready to launch it forward, and he's got a buckler shield that's up here, and it only uses those, and that's the little buckler shield, which is really about the size of a basketball. A buckler shield's just a little bitty one-handed blocker, if you will. There are depictions of this where this back here is a flail, and this is a buckler, and that's the depiction of a gladiator. So it carries on and forth, and there's going to be some variation on a theme. But there's Orion. But he's wearing a kilt and everything else too that we know about, but something's always missing in this depiction here, and it's one thing they brought about whenever I was a kid, and they said it was too sexy or whatever, and kids made a hee about it, and they didn't want to talk about it anymore, because some of the times whenever they show this depiction, they show here like this, well, you can see first of all that one star is moving through time. That bow's getting ruined through time right here. Now, I guess I'm blocking the stars a little bit, but you can see this star moving through, and it's like him pulling back an arrow and releasing it. Another thing below this belt, though, he supposedly has a sword. And that's what the he goes with, because some teachers said, well, and in a lot of depictions and in the stories, that's not a sword. Well, what's that supposed to be hanging down? Ha 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 ha. But that's reality. So you can see him pulling back this arrow, and this is past the time of now. In a modern day, let's see if I can catch it, but he's pulling back that arrow. There, we're right about there now. But time moves on, right? But down here at the very bottom, you can see a few of them lined up, and it's a smaller one, and three kind of like the belt idea, and it's rising up. Well, that has to do with Chuck's finding here. And we're almost at 30 minutes. This isn't probably going to go on. I'm going to see if I'll get it in 45. If we look at the actual constellation setup, as opposed to that just dot-to-dot look, you'll see that here's the way it normally looks, and again they're missing this one star. And I don't know if the star is missing now that would have been there to there, ding 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 ding, right? And now they're using that one, right? But did the star blink out in ancient days? I mean, what happened? Because they have a temple thing built there. Well, one easy way to cover it up would be to say, well, they fixed God's little mistake, or they made it to where the bow was more correct, because the bow wouldn't work correct with a bend in it like that. But if we look at this, all the other stars can make up an area, which that's where they get the idea of the Aegis. And down here below this skirt that's here, he's got this thing hanging down like a Scottish man does, like an Egyptian did, like Greeks did. And it has to do with three also, and I've shown you in a few of these tales that we talk about how whenever they have that three idea, then even with Orion and its symbolization that went with ancient Europeans that we were talking about through Cahokia and also in the River Boyne and that whole area, and its connections in that Christmas video that I did and the connective video, showing you that in their story that 3 things that fall was actually in one story 3 balls, because he's a god, so he has 3, but also there's 3 things that hang down on a man, and so he's got a belt, but those stars are below the belt, so he actually has a belt, and then there's those 3 stars that hang down, and then that is symbolizing something else in fertility. Ha ha ha, there's a connection. So CFAP's made this connection that this looks like Orion, and there's very few things missing. In fact, what's missing is that belt of Orion's 3 stars. Well, they're kind of there. There's 1, 2, 3. And they go along, and the center one is slightly brighter. But if they were to be in truth and reality, this one should be brighter too, brighter, and this one dimmer and offset just a hair. Well, if you look at it, it is offset just a hair. And instead of picking out the wells here that are all just with it, if that had the extra building there showing if that, and that's a double star, then this correlates okay with it. But there'd be 3 things missing here. And then where's that hanging down sword that we're talking about? Well, no, that's there. That's there. It's something that they found through running this LiDAR also. And you can't really see it. It's at the bottom of the screen here, but they show these ... going around this dash that's there that looks a lot like this dash that's here, with a bunch of these dots right here going around it. He's talking about it right now, and he says they equate that to a rattle of a rattlesnake, and then they've got the snake. That makes another connection in a few different ways to our idea about snakes and symbolization. But that's actually there. Where they found this thing called the Rattlesnake Causeway. So it's one of those snake causeways that's there, but if you'll look right there, there it is. In the same place that's there. In fact, if you look at regular depiction, what we were looking at before, it's there. They always drawing back a bow. There it is. And that's a Rattlesnake Causeway, because down at the bottom of it there, they had the rattle on the rattlesnake, and so the rattler is coming up, and it works the other way. And in the symbology that even Chuck showed in his last video about this idea, apparently a death procession went along with the idea that you had to do something down here, and you did a ceremony that worked with rattles, I'm thinking. And then they came and brought you up through this causeway into an area of rebirth. Ding ding. And you were supposed to make a leap of faith into the sky, into the cosmos, and take that sacred boat ride that we talked about the Egyptians and the Milky Way, and the reason they call it the Milky Way, and the River Boyne, and they had that same way and that same concept, and here's a reflection of it right here. But also notice that they call this, for some reason, Fox Mound. And in the old, like Göbekli Tepe and stuff, that's a fox that's draped over a man's belt that's there. And it's flopped over in front with a face, but then has it down with the tail. And this flop is that tail. Correct me if I'm wrong. And it is the Fox Mound. I don't know what the connection is that they actually have with it. I haven't gotten that deep with it. I haven't gotten deep enough other than to look back and forth and click back and forth a few times between the depiction on the ground and the depiction there, saying, well, there's one that's off on the bow, And you know what's missing is the key to Orion. But it's missing because there's a road going right through here right now. And right through that place there. So here's the celestial journey that he's showing with the Rattlesnake Causeway. And it's just out of view, but there's a person standing here, and their celestial journey was you were to come here and then meet up and make a leap of faith and be caught up into the Milky Way and take that ride. It's a slightly different point than the one that they come up with in the Egyptians and others, but it's very, very similar. In fact, we don't know enough about the idea to not say that it doesn't link up at a certain amount of time at nighttime during a certain part of the year, whenever it happens exactly in that little notch right there with the exact same point of Cygnus, and here it comes through and bam, it is the same thing. But because they're on the other side of the planet, it's hooked up differently. It couldn't be the same, could it? But it could hook up to the same linkage that's there. Where are we at? 36? So we talked about before where whenever this lines up, this celestial smoke cloud lines up, that this is the ceremonial honor and sacrifice and smoke that burns up in the sky and everything. And there's other videos that I'm making references to. And here it shows up again in this idea. But there's another idea, leap of faith, that comes to mind too. You know, when they do it in the one in Indiana Jones in The Last Crusade, that leap of faith is off of a lion's head. You land in nowhere. But there's a path. That same concept again echoed off of ancient Astro Theology here, which is the concept of, what was that, number 3 or 4? Astro Theology and its connections. So he's made this connection here, and I'm adding to it, but I'm agreeing and concurring 1,000% with it. You'll need to check out his separate video on it. He just goes straight through it, and the connections here, and the fact of him pulling back the bow, and the idea. Doesn't say Aldebaran has to do with Star Wars. Doesn't say a lot of the things I made connections on, but that's from my other videos, from stuff that he doesn't have to do with, really. I found him make another connection too on an ancient video series that he did, which was on the Shroud of Turin, which is real neat, and his connections there, and Ralph Ellis and what Batman came up with. And I think they're on a dog for a hunt idea too, but clearly you can see this. But that path that's right there that we always talk about, that's the sacred path that's there, it's like a 2-lane highway with the shoulders on it, or 4-lane highway wide, that runs through. And if you'll look, it's a little swampy on the left and right, and you lead right up through there, and then there's that symbolic journey through water, and that idea of 2 lakes that comes with the idea of passing through. The only thing we're missing from the dog story is the dog early and the dog late. If you watch my video on that connective that they had from this concept, and then a river that runs through, which would have been about where we see that belt of Orion somehow, or past its body, far in line to it, of course, because you have to make the journey, and it's not just 100 meters long. But that causeway that we're showing here is actually a mile long, almost exactly. And so I'll see if I can get another depiction on that idea. And of course, all these trees wouldn't have been here at that time, and all those trees that were there, so this would have been an open spot. And so you start making connections to these people in the Astro Theology, death cults, and where it all runs out to, and Fox Mound, and this Fox thing that had to do with, from the Wayback Machine, and Orion's belt, and it lining up through its body right through this area here. The connecting of the Aegis, which it looks like they had somewhat of a connection to too. I mean, agreed there are extra ones all in here, and I again have not taken and gone back and forth and looked at all these and see if it even correlates to stars in any way. But I know what this connects to, and I know Orion's Nebula connects to down here too. So there are connections that I'm totally in concurrence with this. I don't know if, you know, Chuck even says in it he doesn't think he's the only person that had this idea. I didn't have it. I haven't done that much on Cahokia though. I've done other connections for showing other places, like I just recently talked about, where they have a layout, which because of the way they're laid out, ends up correlating, just like we know Orion's Belt and Cairo with the Great Pyramids and stuff go. But it makes you wonder if there are other long lost places that would correlate with other dots and actually lay out Orion somewhat correctly. There's another hex pattern that hooks all the way from Egypt all the way up into Europe that hooks up to a giant hex that I did a video series on, well, 4 years ago now too, that people have shown with Baalbek and other incredible sites and ancient sites are all connected to it, like they knew where to live for some special reason. But then the other missing thing in that video is, well, the Pentagon is just the middle of a star and where are all those star points at, and it shows you it spans more than the old world. A little bit. Quite the connective here though. And so here's the way it would have looked, and here's this rattle area, and looking up this procession that would have been the death procession, I guess, if you will, hooked up with this cult. And it's probably had to do with rebirth, and every year they ran through it, much like Stonehenge and ideas like that. But there's that procession that runs right there again, his sword, if you will, and the connection of 3. But you make it up that procession, and then you make that leap of faith up into the sky, up into Orion the Hunter, Valhalla, concepts that go along with it too. And here he goes again, drawing back that arrow. Right now in time we're here, but soon it will change a little bit. How long will he keep this idea going on of Orion the Hunter? I don't know. It reaches far past its origins. In fact, once we figured out its origins, it seems to reach far past it. For again, going with that Cro-Magnon idea, we've shown Lagoon Cave and other caves where they showed literally they knew where Taurus was, and they knew where Orion the Hunter was and the Pleiades was, and laid them out. In fact, it took later with a lady in there saying, well, this is east and this is there. So, wow, you know what? It's like in the sky, like during the time whenever it happened, this would have been like if you could see right through the wall, like transparent. They painted this. In fact, they picked this band going across here for exactly that reason. And how amazing that connective is. And where is that? Well, that's 35,000 years ago. So connections go deeper and deeper, but we're going to lose ourselves in the idea of people before they had a great cult where they built a great mound for a great person, renowned people of old. It makes you wonder what's under that mound over here, what's under that mound over there. But slowly over time we're going to lose that idea. But sometimes mounds were actually built on the top of another mound. This is a mound built on another mound. Maybe for a reason. Maybe we dig down to a point and we say that's it, but maybe that isn't it. Just like in Galt, down here in Texas, where we go, oh, that's it, so you don't have to dig there anymore. But they gave those people a bucket and told them to go out and dig there. They went and got in the pit and dug. Duh. Oh, whoop. What's I find, man, we dug for an hour or two just sitting there bullshitting, but look at this thing. And they showed them a giant arrowhead that's 10 inches long, Salutran point. The only connectives to that are in Spain. And again, connectives to a Cro-Magnon type man from way back when. Like, share, and subscribe, and enjoy. Let me know what you think about this connective. Y'all check out CFAP's channel. Guy's really after my heart here. He plays golf. Recently lost his dad, which I did longer ago than he did, of course, but have connections there. But my love of golf and so on, and ancient civilizations, it's really cool to actually watch his videos and see him connect. Peace.